we've got a fantastic program for this afternoon, starting off with a panel on inclusive design. In your program, it'll say that Aimee Mullins was intended to moderate it. We are lucky enough to have her video conferencing in, tech allowing, for this, so I'll be monitoring. But I'd like to introduce all the panelists formally. So we've got Aimee Mullins, who probably needs very little introduction. She is an athlete, an actress, a model, so much stuff going on. She's really just an amazing person working in this field. And we've also got Grace June, who's the executive director of the Open Style Lab, a nonprofit based out of Parsons here in New York. And we've also got Lucy Jones, who's a designer really making amazing headway into this space of inclusive design with her brand Fora. So if I could welcome Grace and Lucy to the stage. And it looks like we've got Aimee set up. Aimee, can you hear me? Yes?
I can.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Okay. Is this on a little bit? Can you hear me? Okay.
I hope so.
Yeah. So welcome to all of you. I'm so excited to get into some of these meaty details about all of your work. I wanted to actually start, though, with Aimee. Aimee, I heard you speak about prosthetics and your experience with prosthetics a couple years ago. And I'm going to quote you because I was really struck by something that you said during this talk. What you said was, if you don't have to have human legs, why would you only look at them? In other words, why would replicating human legs be the optimal choice? You know, why not go beyond? So I'm just wondering if you could maybe start us off by speaking about what you meant and also a bit about your experience. We have some images up on the screen too.
Great. Well, hi everyone. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but hello from the West Coast. Well, the image you're looking at right now are, I think everybody now has become familiar with these sprinting legs, but 22 years ago, I was the first person in the world on them. And, it's a rare thing to be a bilateral amputee, meaning both sides. So most amputees have their prosthetist model the prosthetic leg off of the flesh and bone side. So your height and your weight and the pronation of the feet, all those things are already determined. They just need to achieve symmetry. But with me, it's just a big X factor. And that had always been treated as a major disadvantage. It's like totally the princess and the pea. One hip is even slightly higher than the other, and it really changes my walk. And, my entire negotiation with the ground has been imagined my whole life. Like I'm actually sort of suspended in the air, sort of a foot and off the ground. So that kind of conduit of my imagination being used to feel what gravel is or ice or marble floor meant that I was kind of always in this headspace with regard to my proprioception and feeling of the ground and places around me and what textures and materials would be. And I was trying to become the fastest woman in the world on prosthetic legs. And, it was this big headache for all the leg designers, like who were making basically something that approximated a human leg. The idea is you replace what isn't there. So it had a shin component and a foot component. And the problem is, no matter how amazing, your stride is and your form, if you think about binding your ankle into a fixed 90-degree position, you're always going to be striking with the heel first. And so that heel-toe moment really adds time on the clock. If you watch a sprinter run, they only run on the balls of their feet. The heel actually never hits the ground. And it's like a cat. So this was the genesis of this really kind of childlike, naive idea. If I'm trying to be the fastest woman in the world on prosthetics and we don't have to have human legs, why are we looking at them? Why aren't we looking at the fastest thing that runs? So that idea of designing these carbon fiber legs that are modeled after the hind leg of a cheetah was the start for me of kind of blowing it wide open. Like, why do we have to have, why can't I have glass legs? Why can't I have legs covered in peacock feathers if I want? Why not? Why does this thing always have to have such a heavy social representation of loss instead of it being about something, fun and something beautiful and creating wearable sculpture and being able to take the fact that I can change the space, change what is in the space between where my leg ends and the ground every day, and make that about possibility and potential rather than limitation.
Absolutely. We've got a few more images that I just want to share. One.
Yeah, so these are silicone. These are made in England, and I wish we could zoom in and see those, because as my grandmother always said, I would never have inherited those ankles or feet. Like, no way. That my family is cankles, all the way cankles. But these are like, and perfectly pedicured toenails, which I definitely wouldn't have had either all the time. But these were for a 4-inch heel, because Aimee McQueen gave me these shoes, and kind of as a dare, and there were no legs made. There were no legs high enough to wear a heel like that. So it's kind of like the old time, like a Barbie doll foot, right? Like her foot's always like that, and you shove the shoe onto it. So I'd had silicone legs made for a very low kitten heel, which, at 19 was just like, oh, I get to finally wear heels. But then I was like, no, I want to wear heels. And they said it can't be done. And of course, you just have to keep going till you find people who say yes to your crazy ideas, instead of always telling you it can't be done before they even try it. This is actually a broken foot, a regular kind of, it's called a satch foot, a foam foot. That's the interior of this, that they broke to then rejig to be able to get that 4-inch angle. So yeah, walking in these, I'm suddenly 6'1", and it changed my whole spatial relationship with door jams and people. But that I probably wouldn't have walked runways as a model if I couldn't play with my height. Do we have any other legs on there?
Yeah, so we've got these next ones. Ooh, if I can click through. It's not. Oh, there we go. These
Okay,
I picked because these I felt kind of beautifully encompass what you were talking about with this notion of playing with the options that you could have.
Yeah, these were made for me by Matthew Barney for one of the films in the Cremaster cycle. And this I call these my jellyfish legs. I can't walk in these. These are just sculptural. So I had read a lot about Sarah Bernhardt, who the actress from the turn of the last century, who if a lot of people don't realize, just like a lot of people don't realize that Frida Kahlo had a prosthetic leg, but Sarah Bernhardt also had one of her legs amputated, and she would, in her very theatrical way, she had a litter, like a Chinese litter, where 4 strapping men would carry her into a room, like kind of lounging and reclining. But she did that because she couldn't actually, it was too painful for her to actually wear a prosthetic, so she couldn't walk. And so she was carried around in this way. And I thought, well, that would be kind of great, but I would still want something really sculptural at the bottom. And so this was used in the film, but they look like they're blown of glass. They're actually optically clear polyurethane, which is the stuff that bowling balls are made out of. So they're quite heavy, actually. But yeah, there's no functionality in these legs. This is purely an object of art and whimsy and fantasy, and it, in my experience, when I do wear prosthetics that really play with the aesthetic function, it changes the conversation. It changes how I feel about my body. It changes how people interact with me. People want to ask questions. They find themselves thinking they're beautiful, and it's completely, it changes the way we've all been sort of trained to interact around these kind of assistive medical devices that are prosthetics.
Absolutely. So I want to turn to Grace and Lucy, because as designers, as people thinking about how to approach the body in all mobilities, abilities, I'd like to just discuss kind of how, if I can get the PowerPoint to move, particularly starting with you, Grace, how you think of technology as a resource for design, as a resource for rethinking clothing.
Yeah, that's a great question. First, Emma, thanks for having us and even Skyping us in. For me, I feel technology, fashion has always been technology and vice versa. From the earliest looms to 3D printing, textiles today, it's always been ingrained. And that's one of the first things we try to integrate in the mindset at our lab. So Open Style Lab is a nonprofit at Parsons School of Design, and we kind of are the R&D lab that kind of fabricates all of these possibilities on leading thought leadership for inclusion. And some of the ways we do this is to make wearable tech maybe accessible or a better amplification for greater independence, looking at accessible clothing and the redesign of accessible clothing that is easier for donning and doffing or for dexterity challenges and paralysis. But most importantly, we work with someone with a disability. And that can mean anyone who's gone through injury, who's in the aging category, as we've seen this morning, or someone who has been born with a disability. So we co-create, and we think that's probably the best method of innovation through tech, and see it as a tool rather than as an ends mean.
And Lucy, I didn't realize when I formed this panel that you and Aimee have such a close connection. Apparently Aimee was one of Lucy's, what is it, judge for her final project when she was graduating school. So if you could just speak a bit about that, your work, kind of where it came from, and also what you're doing with your brand right now.
Yeah, so Aimee, hi. Big fan. And actually, when you walked into the room, I remember I wrote papers about you, and I was just like, this is all I care about right now. So thank you for judging and selecting me. So my work.
You deserved it.
Oh, thank you. So my work started at Parsons School of Design. And basically, I was challenged to design a solution that could one day change the world through fashion. And I didn't know how I was going to do that, but it really started with a conversation with a young family member who had some difficulties dressing independently, and he has cerebral palsy. And I remembered that that was the first time I had ever thought about a portion of society that is seemingly forgotten within the fashion industry. And so I sent a Craigslist ad out. That's how it really started, on a Craigslist ad. And I was lucky enough to meet wonderful people to collaborate with, and in particular, a woman called Ronnie Ellen Raymond, who had multisclerosis. And she worked with me, and she kept saying, I want the wow factor. I just want the wow factor. And so she uses a wheelchair, and that started my whole thesis, challenging beauty and disability and its relationship with disability, and really focusing on the seated body, and really thinking about the fact we all sit down, and how do our clothes accommodate for that. And that's where my work has taken me since.
I know that both of you work under the principle of universal design. That term gets thrown around a lot, as does design intervention, when talking about this space. I was wondering if you guys could just explain to people who might not be familiar with these terms sort of what that entails, what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, universal design essentially by definition just means you can design for anyone, and it's for all bodies, all abilities, for everyone. That sounds great, but it's actually really hard to do, right? And also, how are you going to do it? So some of the ways that I think Open Style Lab has been looking at how to make universal design accessible is kind of taking a more broader approach. So in our ethos, we make style accessible for greater independence, as well as greater inability to have mobility and flexibility with your life, but we really see style as a social cue that kind of gives in maybe higher employment for people with disabilities. So universal design in this sense is leveraged through style and fashion, but it's also related to how you might be employed. Like, think about it. You go to a job interview and you sit there, and not only do they see your CV and your resume, but they look at what you're wearing. They look at the social cues that you're bringing. And your voice is also amplified by the things that are on your body. So we look at not just clothing as a way to provide extra functionality or things that are just nicely, brightly colored, but can it really leverage your self-confidence, empowerment? And therefore, hopefully, if you didn't know, there's 77% of New Yorkers in America that have disabilities that can't get a job. So if you can leverage that through clothing, something basic as that, is that possible? So it's a big ethos, but we do it in our 10-week summer program at Parsons. So this year we're focusing on mobility as one of the biggest factors that we're gonna look into material sciences as well as wearable tech. And for those 10 weeks, we invite designers, engineers, and therapists to work with one person with a disability. And this year we're working with Riverside Rehab. So looking at some of the friends and families there who are either in long-term or short-term care that would like to volunteer to be able to co-design with us, and seeing that there are actually a lot of common denominators between dexterity, paralysis, and even aging that we see that's focused on clothing. So long story short, universal design is a broad topic, but we got style and we got fashion to kind of facilitate that conversation.
Absolutely. And Lucy, for you with your work, I was wondering if you could speak a bit about how universal design plays into how you rethink these projects where you're rethinking and redesigning very basic aspects of a wardrobe.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, so universal design is based on 7 principles, and one of them is intuitive to use. Another one is space. Another one is, ease of use. And so, I mean, it is really difficult to truly be universal. And I'd like to reference, the OXO Good Grips that everyone probably has at home on a potato peeler. And that was designed for someone who had arthritis, I believe. And this idea how something that stems from a need or innovation that stems from a need can transcend into society and benefit many different people. And so how that works in my practice is basically, I mean, again, starts from a need, and then we'll solve that one problem, the most, I guess, extreme situation that we can think of, and then we have happy discoveries when we're like, oh, and it can work here, 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 and it can work for you and you and you and you, and it was because it was designed with integrity and for a purpose. And I think that's the most important thing, is designing with purpose. I think if we all designed with a purpose, we would benefit more people with our work.
Absolutely. And as you're saying that, I'm really struck by one of Lucy's shirts is on view in the exhibition across the street. And so many people come in and are like, oh, that's such an amazing, cool top, where can I get it? And they don't realize the functionality that it was necessarily specifically designed for. It has that fashionability, that style, and so it has this ability to go and be used by many different people. Since we're talking about fashion, and we're at the Fashion Institute of Technology, Aimee, you open shows for Alexander McQueen, you've been in Dazed magazine, ID, the list goes on, and obviously you guys are working in sort of the fashion industry and at fashion institutions, and I was wondering if you guys could all touch on sort of the importance of fashion as a site for this conversation, as a area for playing with the body. Anyone want to go first? Aimee?
Sure. Well, I just wrote down what Grace had said about your voice is amplified by what you put on your body. That right there is sort of the foundation of why fashion is a perfect arena to explore these larger societal conversations around inclusivity. For me, it was the fact, it was obviously very personal, and people were coming up to me. I got some attention as an athlete, and then was invited to speak around the world at design conferences because of the sprinting legs. And I had people, men and women, say to me, just say, gosh, you're really pretty. You don't look disabled. And I was like, that's wow, thank you, because I don't feel disabled, but thank you for your honesty. It was like, wow, for someone to feel that comfortable to say that, it was my first insight into like, oh my God, there's an us and them paradigm, and you see me as them. You see me as other from afar. And only when you hang out with me, you're like, oh God, she's just like us. Like, yeah, so is everybody. Yeah. Just like us. And that, something that a lot of times I feel like advocacy is done, in a way that necessarily needs to shout from the rooftops, And I felt like I wanted to do something that was a bit more, below the radar. I didn't want to have people get their guard up and feel like, oh gosh, they don't know how to behave or what to say or what's the politically correct terms. And, I wanted to just circumvent all of that and move in a forum, basically set up these conversations in a really sneaky way. And I thought, the frivolity of fashion, the ever-changing nature of it, the fact of the individual expression, it just felt like, and like I said, the fact that people were saying, we think you're beautiful, you don't look disabled. And I was like, yeah, but that swimsuit calendar you got on your wall, she's got more prosthetic in her body than I do. So maybe you don't realize that her nose was amputated and her breasts have prosthetic in them, but that's really common in fashion advertising, let alone Photoshop, let alone what's remade in post in an image. So the frivolity of creating images was, for me, a really important tool to facilitate these conversations. And so I talked about it in press, and like kind of instantly I get this letter from Nick Knight, photographer, and Lee McQueen. And it was like, will you get on a plane and come to London next week and work with us? And that sort of, it was my first fashion cover. And I remember when Nick asked me, it had a top. I don't know, do we have that image from Dazed?
We do. The PowerPoint's being a little, ooh.
Okay.
Wait, we have the days. Oh, now I have all
I think
of
it's
your
back
photos,
a couple.
guys. Sorry, guys.
Oh.
So these are some.
Everybody's awesome work.
Now the PowerPoint is working, so we can see everyone's awesome. Oh, now it's stopped again. Oh.
Man.
We'll keep trying, but keep talking.
Whatever. You guys can all Google it. But basically, Nick asked me if I would. The top wasn't working, so he's like, "Would you just, do it topless?" And now my back is to the camera, but I remember thinking, no one's ever going to see this where I grew up. Like, my mom will never see this. My grandmother will never see this. This is like some edgy London magazine. And of course, it's in the tape, the picture now. But it's something I'm very proud of. But I remember at the time being like, this is jumping in the deep end. Take your clothes off. And of course, it's a very, when that cover came out, I was standing in a news agent in New York, and this guy and his girlfriend came in, and he went, dude, look at how they photoshopped those legs onto her. And I was like, oh, wow. Okay. Well, this is even going to be more fun now, because people don't even know what's what. And I guess that was my point, is to say, every single body is its own beautiful, imperfect temple, everybody. And yes, we are living in an age where people are remaking themselves. Knee replacements, hip replacements, cosmetic surgery is just so common now and accessible. And at least at the ground level, what's most accessible for people is what they put on their bodies. It's the clothes. So I'm looking at that magazine cover and I realize that was 20 years ago in May. Man. Well,
So I
20
think
years ago.
just given timing, I do want to open it up to see if anybody give people the opportunity to ask questions to Aimee, Grace, and Lucy. If you have a question, you can come forward. Don't be shy.
Be bold.
There we go. They're coming. Okay. Yeah, it should be on.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for the inspiring work. I work with disabled women in India to create hand block printed clothing and scarves, one of them which I'm wearing. My question is to both of you. How do you see the commercialization of clothing made for differently abled people so that it becomes more accessible for a larger audience?
I'll leave that to you.
Wow, yeah. It is difficult, and I started a company, and the real challenging aspect is getting people on board with the real demographics, because people want to see return of investment. And this is the harsh reality of, like, you know, not being able to celebrate the diversity of this beautiful planet, is that fact. However, there are secrets. And it is about, and I think there are some companies, I mean, you look at, you know, Tommy Hilfiger did it. You look at, and what Grace mentioned about commonalities, you do find a lot of commonalities, and yes, they won't work for everyone. That's a start. And I think looking out for those little, you know, moments, like, for example, you know, magnet closures down the front, or and for smaller people having a split at the back if they've got a curvature in their spine, you know, a little pleat at the back. There are simple solutions that can, you know, alter the silhouette but still be applied to more people. Also, customization is becoming, I guess, the buzzword now. And you see a lot of companies transitioning their supply chains, and you see a lot of companies that are really trying to figure out, you know, getting clothes that people can choose and design themselves. That is really interesting. And so imagine if hems could be finished as you wanted them. And I think that's how it's going to get commercialized. I can't say it's quite there yet, but keep your eye out for all the commonalities, I guess. Thank you. Yeah.
So I think we probably just have time for one other question. Go ahead.
For someone I don't have a lot of experience when it comes to creating garments for people with disabilities. For someone that's trying to get into it a little bit more, what would be the best advice that you can give?
I guess I'll trickle off Lucy. So other than trying to, I think, expand the inclusive market for businesses, really education is at a forefront, right? If you don't have people with disabilities involved in your classrooms, you'll never learn what is actually the need. So I teach this twice a year at Parsons School of Design for fall and spring, where we co-create with people with disabilities, and I hope that's one way I think students and people could take classes. And the summer program is open to nationwide applicants, and we've even had international applicants come. So this way we can look at what I think Aimee was touching on was pretty much the semiotics or the language of how to talk about people with disabilities. I always think it's people first. So first thing's language. Second is we actually get to visit, see how they commute to work, see their homes, really work with people, and just seeing them who they are in their most vulnerable and I think best state to be able to design something. And you need it through like an occupational therapy lens, through a fashion lens, as well as like an engineering lens. So I encourage, if you haven't seen it already, to kind of look at Open Style Lab for a summer program.
Well, thank you guys, and thank you, Aimee, for joining us from the West Coast. It looks like you're having much better weather over there than we are. But if you would all join me in thanking our panelists.